this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Scams don't always look like scams anymore. AI can make a fake ticket offer look legit or a sportsbook text sound official. And once an identity thief gets your personal information, they can start using your name like it belongs to them. And then what? LifeLock helps detect potential identity threats and suspicious activity. And if identity theft happens, LifeLock's restoration specialist can help restore your identity, guaranteed, because only LifeLock truly protects your name and identity. Get LifeLock at LifeLock.com and use promo code FOOTBALL for up to 30% off your first year. That's LifeLock.com, code FOOTBALL.
Amazon Health AI presents Painful Thoughts.
Why did I search the internet for answers to my cold sore problem? Now I'm stuck down a rabbit hole filled with images of alarmingly graphic sores in various stages of ooze. I can clear my search history, but I can never unsee that.
Don't go down the rabbit hole. Amazon Health AI gets you the right care, fast. Healthcare just got less painful.
JJ, yesterday we took my 5-year-old son on a belated birthday trip to Disneyland. And we were walking on eggshells a little bit, 5-year-old on the spectrum. And the last couple times we've gone to the fair or Sesame Place, he's been just kind of touch and go about some of the rides. But he was fantastic. In fact, the only scary moment came not when we were faced with a giant snake in Indiana Jones or dynamite was blasting in front of us on Rolling Thunder. It was when we were halfway through the line at the Jungle Cruise, weaving up and down staircases, and he looked up at me and said, "Daddy, I need to pee."
I'm JJ, and over the last couple of years, I've been doing everything I can to be a best ball bro. And last season, things finally fell into place. I got 40th in the DraftKings Millie contest, taking home $20,000. Maybe I became a best ball bro, but I'm still looking to learn more about this game. And I still want others to come on this ride with me. So even if you consider me a best ball bro, this could be your year. This could be the year that you officially become a best ball bro. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. We've partnered up with DraftKings again this year for Best Ball, and we've got a can't-miss offer on their biggest Best Ball contest ever. $20 million in total prizes. It's draft one, get one. Draft your team once, no weekly lineup management, and your top scorers start automatically each week, all season long. Download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app and sign up with promo code LATEROUND. Enter a lineup in the $20 million Best Ball contest for $25 and get a bonus ticket for a second entry. 2 shots at the title. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, and joined as always by Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
Doing good, man. Recovering from the mouse. Last night when we got back, we put him down. That was one of those moments. Sometimes you just crack open a cold one and it's just like, this is the most satisfying beer that I could potentially drink right now.
Yeah. I'm a big Disney guy. I love doing all things Disney. It's fun. I mean, for me, there's some nostalgia to it. You know, obviously just, you know, growing up and watching Disney stuff. But like I went to Disney a handful of times growing up too. So like I love the vibe. Like we took my daughter before my son was around to Disney a few years ago, and it was like one of the best trips of my life because it was just you're so stimulated by everything going around you. It just forces you to be so present in the moment. That's why what I love about it.
They don't miss a single detail. And it's crazy just like walking around even in the new Star Wars land where nothing is like too tall, but you forget you're in Anaheim, California, like for the entirety of the day.
To be fair, when I went, it was in May, and I didn't have any slow drafts going. I feel like if I, had that happening, I might, it might be a little bit more tilting where I'd be sitting there, be like, oh, I'm gonna rip a Millie real quick, and then just tilting in the middle of Cinderella's castle or something.
I was literally just about to say, Cinderella, get out of the way. Someone just took Matt Stafford.
Yeah, I'd be going up to all the different characters, asking them who their highest exposed players are and such. You know, what Peter Pan is probably no, he's got to go. I bet you Peter Pan's like really into Tank Dell.
Small in stature.
Yeah, small in stature, like, underdog story. Yeah, he's got Peter Pan loves some Tank Dell. I need some all right, we need some comps in the comments for Disney character to their highest exposed player. We need to hear more of that. That was just off the dome.
Yeah,
so there might be a better Peter Pan one.
Yeah.
There might be a better Peter Pan one. But all right. I want to first dig into some of the stuff that I've been doing recently in drafts before we get to some risers and fallers, because there's some really interesting risers and fallers this week with camp the way that it is and injuries and such. But first, I want to talk about two things. The first thing is I'm leveling out exposures. Like I said last week, I'm trying to make sure that, like I said, like a Bashaw Tootin versus a David Montgomery. If I like Tootin a little bit more than Montgomery, or like in the same tier, which is where I think things are going to be in my next rankings update, there's no reason why, more than likely, I should have an insane stand on Tootin versus Montgomery. Like I'm trying to be realistic and recognize those probability, shifts in the way that I view these guys. So I've been doing that a little bit more, getting guys like DJ Moore, getting guys like Quinshot Judkins. So I'm not at 2%, more at like the 4 to 6% range with some of these guys. But the other thing that I've been really focused on, and this is something I feel like this has been a theme for me and like an awakening for me this summer, is CLV and just thinking about that closing line value. And by the way, I got a couple of questions for people of like what CLV is, just closing line value. So it's just, looking at where you drafted a player versus where that player is generally being drafted. You'll be able to see that obviously when things at the end of the season, a true close, right? Because the end of the draft season, we'll know exactly where their ADP lands. But, your goal is to get good CLV, aka I drafted Stephon Diggs a whole lot in rounds 12 and 13, and now he's a round 8 or 9 guy. And so that's really good value, good CLV. I will say, and I talked about this with our guest today, that I think that CLV is probably a little bit overrated in the best ball streets. I'm not to say that, you wouldn't want that really strong CLV. You, of course, do want that. But if that's the guy you need, that's the guy you need, period. I don't want to like overstate it and miss out on guys, or then all of a sudden have to like fade a player completely because his cost gets too high. So if any of you guys like didn't get Stephon Diggs, then go after Stephon Diggs still. I think it's okay. But if you really want to play the CLV game and you are a little bit concerned about how little exposure you have to Malik Neighbors or Stephon Diggs, find contests, and there are contests out there, but find contests that opened recently that have only been around for a week or two at most. And that way, that no one in that contest was getting Malik Neighbors in round 4 or Stephon Diggs most of the time in round 12 or 13. Whereas, the Millie is one that's been going on since May. And so you have valuations of these players all over the place, and so there's more, higher likelihood of that CLV. So I've been, doing a lot of the, other contests on DraftKings. I've done the new $59 because they opened that one up recently. There's some other contests too. I'm doing a lot of slows right now just to, up my general volume of best ball drafts. But it's something to think about for people who, might be a little bit discouraged after some news happens, or like you got a lot of Ricky Pearsall and you didn't get enough Dazon Stribling, and just doing that to get that exposure. It's a really easy way to do so. And it's to me a way to mitigate that bankroll a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Where it gets difficult is especially early on in the process when people are trying to not predict, but make bets where they're going to have positive CLV. A lot of that will come down to some of the free agents, right? There are people that are holding Tyreek Hill and Brandon Ayuk bags. And there's also people that might be holding rookie bags, guys that they hope to win jobs, or crowded backfields where you're taking late round flyers on players that you would hope to get positive camp news and then close somewhere in the late single digits or something like that. So yeah, it's a treacherous game. And to your point, how much are you really getting out of CLV if you get that round surplus in your bag, but that guy is just like an average player on the season?
Right. Yeah. If Malik Neighbors is actually bad this year for whatever reason, or, like doesn't live up to, like, it's possible. And then all of a sudden, you're sitting there, you're like, oh, I got all this CLV, and it really didn't matter that much in the end, right? It's kind of the way that I felt about Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt last year, right? Where I was pumped because I got a lot of JCM in rounds 18 through 20 last year. And then, all this, Brian Robinson gets traded, all this stuff starts happening. And then he's like a 9th round pick by the end of the summer. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. And don't get me wrong, like he had big weeks and he had some at the right time too, but it wasn't like he was this league winning player. It wasn't like this was a guy that was finding your lineup consistently week in and week out. And so it didn't matter that much in the end. So keep that in mind, that these guys are not locks to do well just because their ADP is risen.
Yeah, it's a joke in the gambling space, which is where CLV comes from, is that you can't feed your family in CLV. CLV comes from, like, let's say I bet a dog at +7 and the line moves to 6.5. Like, I have tremendous value in having that +7 when the line is moved to 6.5, but I still need them to cover that 7 in order to win my bet. And that's in a very, I mean, we're talking about NFL game scores. That's like a very narrow, finite level of outcomes where those numbers have a ton more value than in best ball, where we have just such a wide swath of variance that can hit all these players.
There's 19 other players on your team that are going to impact things. You know, that's a great thing to bring up. Like with a line, it's literally just like, oh, this is one outcome. One thing is determining whether I win or lose this bet. Whereas with best ball, the bet is a 1 out of 20 player on your team, you know, where even if that player does really well or doesn't do well, it might not even matter because of what else is going on that roster.
You bring in pod luck and all that. Like, it is such a small data point in the massive data field that is the entire outcome.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some risers and fallers. I'll just kick it off because you pulled some data together for this, and I think Stephon Diggs is the obvious place to start. Is this from the last 2 weeks, the rising and falling?
This is from
last week,
8-4, so 1 week.
Okay, yeah. So about the last week. So Stephon Diggs is the biggest riser. He's now like a round 9 type player over on DK. I still think that that's undervalued, and so if you are trying to get Diggs, I still think it's fine to draft Diggs. I have him ranked in you know, this is season long, of course, but it does transfer over. But like, I have Diggs kind of in that like Michael Pittman, Chris Godwin. Oh, I'm higher on Pittman than most probably versus DK Metcalf, because I think Pittman could just outscore him completely, but they're all in the same tier for me. You know, like Chris Godwin goes in round 7, DK Metcalf goes in round 7 on DK. I have Stephon Diggs above, well, it's pretty easy to say it now, but like Alec Pierce, Mekhi Lemon would be drafting Diggs over. I think that Wan'Dale Robinson, I'd still be taking Diggs over, and I like Wan'Dale this year. But this is a really good situation for him overall, where he can play inside out. He's going to be the number 2 target there. It sucks that Tunsil is now out for the year. I think that's a huge, huge blow to that offense in general, but I still think that Diggs is someone that you guys can be targeting.
Yeah, and Diggs, I mean, he's just so talented around the ball. It reminds me of mid to late DeAndre Hopkins in that just his quality and skill it's kind of timeless, right? Like, the athleticism could dip a little bit, but his ability to be open, catch the football, move the chains is just going to be one that is valuable for Washington. So yeah, I anticipate him playing a pretty big role for that offense.
Pat Bryant is getting a lot of steam out of Denver right now, and that's really what this rise in ADP is showing. I've liked Pat Bryant more than Troy Franklin. I mean, I liked him more than Franklin even last year, you know, like towards the end of the season. I was a little bit fearful of Franklin post year 1. Bryant was a fine enough prospect, maybe not elite, but was a solid enough guy who I thought was like the standard Sean Payton big slot type player. You know, it's similar to like a guy that came out this year, Elijah Surratt, had a Pat Bryant comp actually. And I was like, you know, I remember texting Matt Harmon, who obviously does a lot of work with wide receivers, saying like, if only Denver needed a, you know, big slot, because Elijah Surratt could just play that role. But Pat Bryant's getting a lot of love. There's talk about him moving to the outside more and maybe even, you know, taking over for Courtland Sutton at some point. I'll say it again. I said it last week on the show, and, you know, there were some comments about this. Courtland Sutton to me is just one of the weirdest players that people in fantasy football get attached to. I will never understand it. It's different in best ball. So, you know, this is a best ball show. I don't want to take it too far. Yes, he has spike week ability. Yes, he can score multiple touchdowns in a given week because of his size and stuff. We're on the wrong side of the age curve with him. He's never been a consistent like top 20 wide receiver. You're really not shooting for a ceiling when you're drafting him. Oh, and by the way, now they have Pat Bryant, but they also traded for Jalen Waddle. So, you know, I have not really been clicking Courtland Sutton that often. I've clicked Pat Bryant quite a bit, even with his, like, you know, if you're getting him in round, you know, I mean, this says that he's still like 18 in ADP, but I'll see him in round 16 even. I have no problem with that because it's so flat once you get past like round 13 in these drafts. So if you want to get Pat Bryant, if you want exposure, I don't think it's a bad idea to still click his name, you know, in round 14 and round 15. Decent prospect, a lot of steam. He can at least play the slot in that offense. And, you know, I'm not sold on Courtland Sutton, and I like the offense in general. It's an offense that I think we can buy into.
Pat Bryant up 15 slots, just like Elijah Surratt's fellow rookie AFC North player, Denzel Boston up 15 spots. I fit that transition in there.
Rich, you're killing me. I thought for sure you were going to talk about like Jacoby Lane, and I'm like, wait a second, and then you pivot to
fellow division
to AFC North. Yeah. So my gosh, so many layers there.
Like how I did that.
Segue. Denzel Boston, yeah. Look, I have seen some drafts where people have reached for Boston above Casey Concepcion, and to me, that's a big mistake because I think Concepcion is very good, an incredibly good prospect, early declare, solid enough breakout score, got work in different facets of the game, not just as a receiver, but as a rusher as well, which gets a little bit of a boost in the Zap model too. I think Concepcion is just a really good prospect and player. I've seen the comp thrown around that I think is kind of interesting, that like Concepcion and the way that his ADP is formulating right now reminds them of Garrett Wilson, his rookie season, where environmentally it looked horrible, but the player himself is really good. Garrett Wilson's a better prospect than Casey Concepcion. So let's at least throw that out there. But I think Concepcion's really good. Like the Zap model, if you guys, read the prospect guide this year, Concepcion was very, very close in Zap score to Mekhi Lemon, whereas Carnell Tate and Jordan Tyson were like the clear alphas in this class. There was a gap to Mekhi Lemon and Casey Concepcion, and Jordan Tyson was the he had a score of like 96 in the model. The model absolutely adored Jordan Tyson, but yeah, Denzel Boston I think can be, he is a better and best ball type player for me. He's definitely a red zone threat. He's going to have some spiked weeks in there. I think it's fine if you want to draft him. I'm just saying, hey, caution, don't get silly. And in my opinion, from a process standpoint, start drafting him over Concepcion, because Concepcion is still very good, even though Boston's getting more hype. Sometimes these players get more hype simply based on what was expected of them going into camp. And if they're exceeding those expectations by a whole lot, these beats get really, really excited about what they're about, even though in comparison to what's already there, or, the player like Concepcion, who is supposed to be good because he's the first rounder, even though Boston had a good draft capital too, there are some instances where it's just versus like expected and expectation. So I would still be drafting Concepcion well ahead of Denzel Boston, but I think Boston's fine once you get into that. Like, I know that he's more round 13 right now. It's fine enough. I'd rather be round 14, round 15 with him, but it's not the end of the world if you want to go that direction.
It's unsurprising based on their archetypes that Boston might be looking better in shorts. I know padded practices have started, but just that style of player, big guy, strong fella. We know KC butters his bread after the catch, very good breaking tackles, stuff like that. So that's the type of skill set that we're just not going to see in August. Maybe in the preseason, maybe as games start, but not right now. All right, let's go to. I was going to say the North. I guess I'm already saying it. The North in the other conference.
Keep these segues going. Go. I want to hear how you take Denzel Boston to this next guy. Let's hear it.
The North in the other conference. It's the running back playing behind a fella who, according to Adam Schefter, recording this today on Tuesday, might be hit with some sort of suspension. We'll wait to see. It's Marshawn Lloyd.
Yeah, look, when Lloyd came out, this is why I love having the prospect guides, because I can go back and at least read the blurbs and read what I was thinking about these players as they were coming out. And Marshawn Lloyd had a very complimentary type profile. He was not a player that profiled as the 1A in his backfield, as in a normal backfield. I think if there's an injury or something, like, he'd be fine. But he's not someone that more than likely would carry a massive workload. He's just really explosive and a good complementary player from that perspective. And so you have him being healthy. I think that he can still play all three downs and be a quality player from that perspective. So I think that where he's going right now, like, this is one of those like CLV instances where, like, it does not matter if you did not get Marshawn Lloyd in the 20th round or the 19th round back in June, and now you have to spend a 15th rounder to get Lloyd. Well, you waited. I think it was actually kind of smart because you waited enough time to see if he was going to be healthy, to see how things looked in camp, because we know that so far in his NFL career, he's just walked onto a field and seemingly, pulled a hammy. And so you see that he's healthy. You see the stuff going on with Josh Jacobs. Obviously you could have thrown some darts whenever the stuff was really happening with Josh Jacobs, but he's still a round 15 guy. He's still someone that you can get and acquire very, very easily. So I am in on Marshawn Lloyd. Not only that, but it's an offense that we know historically with Mike LaFleur has been or Matt LaFleur. My gosh, now that there's two of them, this is going to be really bad. But we know that under LaFleur, they've been a top half offense every year in touchdowns per game. I always throw that stat out there because it just tells you that it's an offense that we can feel good about.
We are excited about Malik Willis this year because of LaFleur, right? That guy was left for dead in Tennessee and went to go play in the LaFleur offense and is now a guy that is making multiple millions of dollars for the Dolphins, and we're excited about this year. So I will definitely believe in LaFleur until I have given evidence to not do so. We talked about some young receivers that were getting some hype, but I think the leader in the hype train so far this summer might be this guy in Kansas City, Cyrus Allen.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, man. You know, he was someone that wasn't even in the prospect guide because he wasn't at the combine. And then, you know, I didn't get to do a write-up on him. I studied him a little bit after the fact. Didn't mind him, but didn't think he was like the obvious day 3 pick. But oftentimes with day 3 guys, from an analytical perspective, there's not much rhyme or reason, especially at running back. I mean, running back for sure, where it's more so about like that year's depth chart than anything else and how those guys perform. Like look at like Woody Marks last year, who, you know, Marks had a fine enough profile, had a really good receiving profile. And that's the kind of stuff I look for. But if you were to start doing the matching stuff and trying to find trends for day 3 hits in general, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do in this day and age. If you look at history, there are definitely times, I mean, like Amon-Ra St. Brown or Stephon Diggs, these players, like you go back and you look and you're like, how in the world were these guys not drafted on at least day 2, you know? And so I look at Cyrus Allen and I don't see a profile where I'm like, oh, this dude is an absolute monster. But I will say his breakout score is a little bit better than some of the other wide receivers that you would typically see on day 3. And he does have a profile that I do think would fit with what the Chiefs need, which is a guy who can get downfield and play all over the formation. He played a lot in the slot in college, but a lot of people believe that, you know, size could be a limitation for sure. He's only 180, so maybe he won't be able to play on the perimeter that much. And obviously Rashee Rice is already manning the slot in Kansas City, but Rice isn't that much of a down the field threat. He's more of a yak threat, whereas Cyrus Allen can stretch the field, and they've had that problem in that offense for years now. I mean, Mahomes has not been a good deep ball thrower. Let's just be real about it. Like he's been well below average over the last couple of years. I think some of it is him for sure. Some of it's also personnel. Xavier Worthy hasn't worked out yet. They have, you know, they relied on Tyquan Thornton last year, who was actually okay in that role. But if they can get a guy who can move around the formation a little bit more in Cyrus Allen, I think it does make sense. So to me, he's fine as a click. He's easier, I think, in season long than in best ball, just because you can drop him if things like, you know, if he's only running, you know, a route on 20% of their dropbacks or something like that, which is very possible to start the year. But I do think that you can click Allen right now because, again, once you get in that like round 15 range, round 14 even, things are really flat at all positions.
You mentioned Mekhi Lemon briefly earlier, and his injury continues to linger, which has seen Dontavian Wicks lift up 2 rounds on DraftKings.
Yeah, and Mekhi Lemon's been dropping a lot. I mean, David Kitchen did a draft where he grabbed him today, I think in round 11 of his draft. And so I've actually gotten some criticism from people, criticism is too strong of a word, but like questions about why I've been lower on Mekhi Lemon in my rankings. And part of it is just kind of like math. Like if you look at projections, you look at the way things would be spread out around this offense, and, you know, it just doesn't work out as well as you might think for Mekhi Lemon. But also, he's been hurt, and now there's even more, you know, injury related stuff going on with him. Now there's reports happening where they're saying that, you know, he's not going to start the season as a starter, and that it might take some time for him to get acclimated and yada yada. I think that's all very real. We see that every single season where wide receivers, they don't just OBJ themselves back into the starting lineup and start dominating. You know, they got to get acclimated. They got to understand what that offense is all about. And so with Philly, they actually have an alternative right now that they haven't had in the past because they haven't had the depth at all at wide receiver. But Dontavian Wicks is showing up in camp. He's had some random spiked, like really high efficiency seasons in Green Bay. It hasn't been totally consistent. And obviously he's had a lot of issues with like concentration and being able to haul in balls. But when it comes to like route running and ability to separate, that hasn't really been a problem for Dontavian Wicks. And so maybe he just needed a change of scenery, and he needed a spot where, you know, he could be a true number 2 behind Devontae Smith, not necessarily the focal point in his offense. Wicks is one of my highest rostered or exposed wide receivers right now because I was drafting him earlier this because I was taking a lot of Jalen Hurts.
Makes sense. You're a Hurts guy. Yeah, exactly.
Right. I had a lot of Jalen Hurts and Mekhi Lemon. I wasn't drafting as much as honestly I probably should have been, but I just wasn't. When he was where he was going. It's not like I have none. I think I'm at like 5% Lemon or something like that. And then Wicks was just the guy that was deep in round 19 that nobody wanted, even though there was a chance that he was going to be a starter. And so I think that you can still be drafting him. Like I'm still drafting him. I'm getting him in round 16, round 17, round 16 mostly at this point, but or 15 even. But I think it's fine to take him there because I do think he's going to play a role, and he's flashed at times in the NFL. So I'm in on Wicks.
The final one, and maybe the most consequential one, because we're starting to see him creep to the top of the 5th round. It's Parker Washington.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's crazy that all these risers I'm actually kind of fine with. Like there's no one that I'm sitting here. I'm like, why is this happening? Yeah, you shouldn't be drafting him as high as he's going because the opportunity cost isn't shifting enough, in my opinion, for a lot of these guys. Or, like a guy like Diggs, I just think that he's still undervalued. Parker Washington is now going where he probably should be going. Like that's where I'm at. If you want to take him in round 5, middle of round 5, I think it's fine. There's so many positive, like we're getting confirmation / we're getting real tangible, ideas at the very least. Maybe they're not concrete and maybe they're not definitively going to happen, but there are legitimate reports out there saying that Parker Washington is going to be the wide receiver that does not leave the field. And I'll tell you what he was doing last year on like an 70 to 80% route share in that offense, not even. And he was still dominating and giving you, great fantasy production. Imagine a world where that is upped even further, like he's a good player. And there's a lot of trends historically that when you look at the highly efficient, maybe lower, volume or point per game players across the season, they tend to do well versus ADP expectation the following year. That's also a Luther Burden and Terry McLaurin thing as well for this year. But I've had Washington and Brian Thomas. Like if you looked at, my rankings in July or something, I always had Washington like one spot ahead. And then over, with the camp hype and the way that I've thought about this offense more, the way they're talking about this offense more, the more I'm just like, I think Parker Washington is a really, really legit player, like where it makes sense. I'm trying to think of what's most rational for these teams. And what's most rational for Jacksonville is to keep Parker Washington on the field and to continue to run that offense the way they ran it during the second half of last year when they were the 3rd best team in football in touchdowns per game, Like, I don't know why you would want to shift that and change that up when it was working for you, despite drafting a blocking tight end in round 2 and, Tanner Koziel in round 5 or whatever it was. I don't think this is going to all of a sudden be a heavy 12 team. But even if it is, I think Parker Washington can still find the field. And then the other thing that does it for me too is that when you dig into his profile more, number one, he actually wasn't that bad of a prospect. I went back. I gotta just like, and I started doing it this year a lot more, but I just got to hand it to the Zap model and let it do its thing. Because anytime I disagree with the Zap model, it bites me in the butt. And that was what happened with Parker Washington. That was back in the day when I published Draft Capital Delta as a pure number form. I don't do that anymore. I do low risk, high risk, or neutral draft profiles. So Draft Capital Delta being how the model views a player versus where his draft capital was, right? In percentile form. So back in the day, Zap scores were just by percentile. And then I'd look at the draft capital percentile, and the difference between those two things was Draft Capital Delta. Parker Washington had a Draft Capital Delta of plus 14%, which means he was way, way underdrafted. And then in the profile, I'm like, yeah, the Zap model is probably overstating. It's like, no, I think the Zap model was actually just right the whole time about Parker Washington, And I just, it's just one of those things where early on, it was a lot harder to like latch on to, because I hadn't published that stuff, to the masses before in that way. And the more I've done it, the more I'm just like, you know what? I'm not even going to question this thing anymore. The robots know, the algorithm knows what it's doing at this point. And so I think he was a good prospect too. In hindsight, sure, but also what the model was saying. So to me, it's all coming together for Washington to be a pretty legit player. And by the way, I just got to throw it out there. I know it's a best ball podcast, but in season long leagues, he's like an 8th or 9th round pick on some platforms. So if you're in a season long league, just make sure you're hyper targeting Parker Washington because he's probably going to be a huge value.
Bill Simmons has the rewatchables. You might have a spring series called like the redraftable. So the prospectables or something where you crack it open like 5 years later or something.
I think it would be fun to do like a live stream or something and go through prospect guides of years past and just be like, what was I thinking doing this? Or like what? Because like there's some where I read the Emeka Egbuka blurb or, profile from last year, and it couldn't have been more right. Like talking about Mike Evans being gone this year, talking about how he's not just a slot player, Emeka Egbuka. And like, I'm so proud of that blurb. And then there's some where I'm like, like the Parker Washington one, what in the world are you thinking writing this? Like, why are you not leaning into the things that you should be leaning into?
You got to the W's in the guide and you're like, I'm over it.
Yeah.
Falls off a cliff.
Yeah, exactly. I do think that it's interesting content, at least, to just like go back, see what you were thinking. And, and I feel that way about my rankings too, where I'm just like, why was I not more, I was actually well above market with like Luther Burden and stuff, but like, why was I not more aggressive with that? Or why was I not more aggressive, in the way that I was ranking these guys based on what the ZAP model is saying? And I tried to do it a little bit more this year, but the problem was this year's class, you couldn't really do it because there was such a flatness to the wide receivers where like, I'm not going to be surprised if Dazon Stribling is the third best wideout in this class, or if we see Caleb Douglas be okay enough, I just think there weren't many good wide receivers in general. So I know that we went on a little tangent there, but I do think that it's an interesting topic to think about as it pertains to best ball too.
And we only got 2 fallers because we already mentioned rookie receiver Mekhi Lemon. So let's talk about a couple of tight ends. One, a rookie from my fighting New York Jets, Kenyon Sadiq, down 2 rounds after a complication after his hernia surgery. You had been drafting Sadiq. Where are you at now with this injury?
I feel like Wolf of Wall Street right now. I'm not leaving. I'm just drafting him. I can't stop drafting Kenyon Sadiq. I don't know, man. You can tell me if I'm a moron because you're way more tapped into the Jets than I am. But to me, it's just this simple equation of very good prospect. Say what you want. You can look at his flaws. I get it. I understand. But objectively, a very good prospect. Mid-round 1 pick, elite athleticism, in an offense that features tight ends. We know that with Frank Reich. I mean, Frank Reich has glowed about having Kenyon Sadiq on his team. Could this linger? Sure. But I'm trying to not fall into the trap that I fell into last year at times. I had a good best ball season, but like there were times where like I got really hyped up about like Ollie Gordon because Devon Achane had this calf strain or whatever, and it didn't matter at all, and I'm trying to not fall victim to that kind of thing right now. Luther Burden's the same way, where it's like, I'm still kind of drafting him at the discount that I'm getting. I got him in round 5 earlier. I'm mostly waiting to round 5 because I'm at like 20% Burden. He's probably my highest exposed like early round player right now. And so I am being cautious of that. I don't want to be too overweight, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I don't want to overstate what these early season injuries might be when the timeline points to them coming back. Alec Pierce, that whole situation is different in my opinion. That's like, there's some really weird stuff going on with what's going on with Alec Pierce because they gave us a timetable that he's missed over and over
correct.
again.
It hasn't come to fruition whatsoever.
Right. Whereas the Kenyon Sadiq thing was, okay, he came back too quickly, seemingly, and now he's nursing this thing again, this sports hernia thing, and maybe he gets off to a slow start. But to me, there's still a very real scenario where Kenyon Sadiq is a very reliable player in fantasy as we get into like week 4, week 5, and as we get through the season. So if I'm getting a discount on him, I mean, I've gotten him, I know his ADP is around like round 15 right now or so. I've gotten him in round 17 now. Like that's where he consistently goes. And I'm like, I just have a hard time in a non-stacking environment taking Cade freaking Otten or Colby Parkinson or something over Kenyon Sadiq. Like if it burns me, it burns me, but I'm also going with a lot of 3 tight end builds, and that makes it a lot easier. Probably feel a little bit different if it was a 2 tight end environment, but that's where I'm at with Sadiq. Tell me that I'm not a moron.
Well, and you've said this a lot recently on a lot of shows about how successful first round rookie tight ends specifically have been in recent history, the way the NFL has been turning. I will say the Jets are treating the D'Angelo Pons, their rookie cornerback injury, the exact same way. They're not rushing whatsoever. And if you look at both Sadiq and Pons, they're both extremely good athletes. They're both like 8+ RAS athletes. They played in big time college football programs, into the college football playoffs. They feel like they know what they have in these guys, and they don't feel any need to rush either of them onto the practice field when things just simply don't matter until a month from now when real games are being played. So everything that I've heard from folks inside the building is that there's no worry, right? Sometimes you get these injuries where guy's not playing and you're waiting and you
literally Alec Pierce.
Yeah. It's like the people are concerned as to what is going on, but these both injuries, I know this is one is a defensive injury, but these feel like deliberate managed timelines and not like house is on fire. What are we going to do?
I'm fully aware that it can burn me, but that's why he's being drafted around 17. And that's why, I'm just looking at the cost benefit there. So
yeah, this isn't like you said. And now that it's even dipping even further, we're getting to the like completely meaningless. Just please find a guy that is going to get you points parts of these drafts. One
more guy I want to touch on is Oronde Gadsden, who is falling because there's a lot of negative vibes around that tight end room and the way they're talking about them. I mean, they're talking about basically like an 8-way committee at this point with all the tight ends that they have and how they want to deploy them. On paper, from a process standpoint, and this is why Market Score had the comps that it did for Gadsden. On paper, he would seem like a smash, like one of the most productive rookie tight end seasons we've ever seen, like top 20 in NFL history, came from Gadsden last year. One of the best offenses that we're projecting for this year, and an offense that doesn't feature tons of 11 personnel, and so you could see the tight end benefiting in those situations. But it does seem like they are going to, give David Njoku some run, Charlie Kolar some run, and it's going to hurt Gadsden. Admittedly, I feel like that he might be a better season-long dart than a best ball dart, because there feels like there's a chance that there's just no usability from the tight end room. And I know that people could say, oh, well, he'll have a spiked week here and there. I wouldn't disagree, but he's going ahead of some other guys that are definitely going to have spiked weeks. He's still going ahead of Terrence Ferguson, for instance. And I don't see why, similar bet from an offense standpoint and an environment standpoint. Of course, you get two high target share players with Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua, but they don't target their running backs in that offense. We already know that. And they don't have a slot guy. So like Terrence Ferguson, I mean, look, Ferguson is like a 17% exposure guy for me right now. So like I'm definitely saying this from the perspective of like, I like the dude. I think he's a really good, talented player, but I don't see the need to like reach for a guy like Gadsden when there are other bets as well, for, a player like, Terrence Ferguson. So kind of like off him in best ball for the most part, at that price, unless I can get him at a 2-round discount or so. And then I will, be fine with him as like a tight end 2 dart throw type in a season long format.
Well, and even somebody like Gesicki, who's like barely being drafted, right? Like there are guys that, again, when we're getting to some of those later rounds, like buying points, right? Like it just seems like it could be too treacherous with such a crowded room. And despite him playing so well last year, like you said, unfortunately the model can't regress for new OC and a team that
there's a lot of factors.
Specifically went out and got 2 guys, right? Like it's honestly, we talked about this offline as we closed last week, you and I. It's annoying because it's an offense that we want to buy into. It's a tight end position in an offense that we specifically want to buy into. But unfortunately for best ball, there is so much ambiguity that it makes a very, very difficult click.
Yeah, not a total fade for me, but I don't think you need to like totally go after him at the moment. So that's it for the risers and fallers. We do have a guest today, Sam Sherman. He's a huge multi-million-dollar winner in best ball on some other platform. He does best ball breakfast with Pete Overzet. He does a show with Legendary Upside and Pat Crane called That's Fair. We chatted about Josh Allen and his ADP, the importance of getting good CLV. So I thought that, his insights were really great. Some of the stuff that we talked about earlier, how he's drafting differently here in August, so much more. It was a great discussion. So here's my interview with Sam Sherman.
Every player in the league has a scouting report: strengths, weaknesses, history, tendencies, everything an opponent wants to know. But what if somebody built a scouting report on you? Data brokers collect your personal stats, your name, address, phone number, family details, and other private information. Then they package it up and legally sell it to anyone willing to pay, sometimes just for pennies. And then what? The person buying your information may not be looking to draft you. They may be looking to scam you, steal your identity, and start using your name like it belongs to them. That's where LifeLock comes in. LifeLock's automatic data broker removal tool helps you find exposed personal information and remove it from those data brokers. If you fall victim to identity theft, LifeLock's restoration specialist will block and tackle for you, which means they'll handle your case from start to finish and restore your identity guaranteed. Because only LifeLock truly protects your name and your identity. So go get LifeLock at LifeLock.com and use promo code FOOTBALL for up to 30% off your first year. That's LifeLock.com, code FOOTBALL. Again, LifeLock.com, code FOOTBALL.
ChatGPT can do more than answer questions. It can help you get real work done. ChatGPT Work is built for bigger projects with multiple steps. You bring the goal along with the information it needs, like briefs, notes, files, feedback, calendars, data sets, or project plans. Then ChatGPT can help turn all of that into something useful. An analysis, a tracker, a deck outline, a prototype, or a workflow you can keep shaping. It can also use approved apps, connected tools, files, and browser context to help move the work forward. And you stay in control. You give direction, review drafts, approve actions, redirect the work, and choose the final output. So you spend less time sorting through busy work and more time making progress on the work that matters. Put ChatGPT to work on your most ambitious ideas and projects. Get started at ChatGPT.com by selecting Work Mode. Available on Plus and Pro plans.
All right, Sam. So we're now finally getting some camp news, which is sweet. I mean, it's not super sweet if you are, holding a lot of Luther Burden bags right now, or Ricky Pearsall or whoever. But the question I asked last week, I'm going to ask you: how do you sort of keep a level head this time of year and sort of like avoid overdrafting zeros? Because there's a lot of hype with like a lot of these like day 3 rookies, for instance.
Yeah, I think it's really tricky. And if you go on X right now, you'll see that basically every single wide receiver that was drafted this year is having an amazing camp. Like Malik Benson is lighting up Raiders camp, Caleb Douglas in Miami, so on and so forth. So I try to like weigh all this news like on kind of a spectrum or a scale. Like I think there are important things like injuries. I think I'm paying a lot of attention to. Now, again, like be careful of the like player X got carted off at one practice, because oftentimes in preseason, like that can be a big deal and that can mean nothing. So try not to overreact to that too much in real time and sort of wait for the reporting to come out. But I think, like injury news, I think is important. I think reporting on snaps with the first team, I think I pay attention to that. I pay less attention to things like just highlight clips or beat reporters saying, player X is having an amazing camp. It's like, okay, are they having an amazing camp with the third team offense or the first team offense? Like that's what I think really, really matters more.
Yeah, I think there's also going to end up being like this year, especially. Do you feel like this is totally subjective, but it feels like we're getting more day 3, random day 2, especially this draft class where there wasn't like a ton of alphas and like a ton of like obvious profiles. Like we're just getting so many of them steamed right now. And I don't remember it being quite like this in the past. Does it feel that way? And I guess like, do you lean into it a little bit? Like, are you leaning into like Cyrus Allen a little bit or Jacoby Lane a little bit? Like just based on the way that some people, some of these beat reporters are talking about them.
Yeah. I think answering your first question, I do feel like it is worse this year. I was actually I do a show with Pete Overzet weekly on his channel, and I was wondering, like, obviously this isn't the first offseason where we've had algorithmic social media. Like I think there's something about X like in their algorithm now that like amplifies hype cycles more than we would in the past, because everyone's algorithm is like tailored towards that. You click on one post of Cyrus Allen and then all of a sudden you get fed 10 or 15 more. And 5 years ago, that wasn't the case on social media, right? It wasn't algorithmic in that sense. It was kind of more like a timeline of news. So anyways, I do think there's something to that. But to the specific, I think people are probably more interested in the specific players. I actually have been leaning in a little bit on the Cyrus Allen and Jacoby Lane to the extent that I think they are like draftable in the 18th round. Because I do think it matters in the context of those are both offenses that have the ceiling to be, top 5 in the NFL in scoring if things go right. And both those teams do have pretty wide open wide receiver rooms, particularly in wide receiver, 2 or 3 on those teams. So I have been willing to click those guys a little bit, but again, it's like, 17th, 18th, 20th round picks or whatever, not chasing them huge up the board.
Yeah. Which every once in a while you get like that, like 13th round Cyrus Allen and you're like, okay, could this happen? Could this work out? Maybe, but I'm certainly not going to pay that kind of price for it. Now that we're in August, another question I want to ask is, obviously you've been drafting for a long time now this summer. I have too. Are you approaching things differently in your August drafts than you were, let's say, in like May and June?
Yeah, I think tying into the first point, I think now that we know a little bit better now about what later round rookies and young players are looking good in the later rounds, I'm skewing a little bit more towards drafting those players as opposed to sort of like the boring veteran types. Like I think I'm taking, I don't know, who's an example? Calvin Ridley is maybe a guy who I was drafting more of in May just because I'm trying to avoid zeros with my last couple of picks. I know he has a contract. He's going to be on the team. Whereas some of these guys, Jacoby Lane, whoever, you might be taking total zeros there. So it's a little bit more of like taking some of the funner rookies instead of the boring veterans. And then I think like structurally, I'm a little bit gearing more towards late round running back, as I think a couple of the late round running back targets have become more clear to me. For me personally, that's like Marshawn Lloyd and Jaden Blue.
Yeah.
For a while it was like completely barren at running back past like pick, 140 or 150 or so. And I think we're starting to get a little bit more guys I like there. So that means maybe a little bit more wide receivers, tight ends in the early rounds instead of running backs, and a couple more running backs picked late.
Yeah, I love that. I love that notion. And I felt the same way where it's like, you don't know back in June, not only like Marshawn Lloyd's a great example, not only like, is he going to be healthy, but like, where's he sort of sit within the depth chart? And it seems like everything's gone in a really favorable way for him. So you just have more comfortability and confidence that he's the right kind of click to make. And then obviously there's, stuff going on with Josh Jacobs that may or may not come to fruition. But regardless of that, it does make sense. And it allows you to be really flexible with your roster construction as well. One question I really want to ask is, you're seeing some players that have seen a pretty big jump and change in ADP. Malik Neighbors being one where he was like a 4th rounder for a while, and now you're seeing him in like the late 2nd pretty frequently. Stephon Diggs, obviously a huge gain given that he signed in Washington. My question for you, because I know that there's a lot of people out there who, didn't get a lot of Diggs or didn't get a lot of Neighbors. I wish I got more Neighbors personally. So I want to hear the answer to this just from that perspective. But how do you handle things now? And you could talk about this in the opposite direction as well, because like guys get hurt. Kenyon Sadiq is a good example where I thought he was a great click. I was clicking a lot of them on DK. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, the sports hernia injury is actually going to continue and not stop. And so maybe he'll be ready in week 1, but obviously his ADP is tumbling. So with all this shifting in ADP, if you missed out at the more favorable ADP, are you doubling down? Are you saying, oh, I got enough Neighbors, I'm done drafting Neighbors? How do you handle that in total?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think like before getting into the specifics of maybe those situations, I am someone where I don't worry too much about like, oh, I didn't get Neighbors at the best possible price at pick 45. Therefore, I'm not going to chase him up to pick 20. Just because I think there's some people that are like, oh, if you take Neighbors at pick 20 and say you advance that team to the finals, you're competing against teams that got Neighbors at pick 45 and you have a disadvantage. Therefore, you should just like fade Neighbors and hope that like he is not the guy you need. I pretty strongly like disagree with that notion. I think generally you should just kind of like update your rankings based on new information. If that player like at its new price is still a good pick, like based on your updated rankings, I'm not worried about like where the best price was that you could have got him a month ago. Sure, there's like, I bet you could come up with some hypothetical scenario where, like, say, I don't know, Kyron Williams tears his ACL and Blake Corum goes to the 1-2 turn. Then I think that's like a level of change where like you might want to consider that dynamic, right? Yeah. Like, but I think these are all the Diggs, Neighbors examples. It's not extreme enough where I don't think that matters too much. So for me, like those specific situations, I think both those guys kind of had deserved skyrocketing up the boards. I think the Neighbors information on his health, I think really does matter a lot. So for those two guys specifically, I really have been chasing him up. And then, Diggs, I feel like the Diggs thing is just like a lesson that I somehow fail to learn every offseason, is that like when these veteran guys sign, they just like inevitably go up. Yeah. So I think I missed that one a little bit. I wasn't taking a lot of Diggs. That said, though, it's like he could have signed with, I don't know, he could have signed with a much worse landing spot.
He found the perfect spot. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was a little bit of bad luck there.
Yeah. I've kind of like gotten to the point where it's almost like the meme of like, you think about something really basic and then, there's like a nerd, the nerd part where they're like thinking about CLV and, you're doing the calculations. And then at the very end, you're the expert and you just think about it, and just getting the right guy once again. Right. And like, I feel that way almost with like a Neighbors or like these two examples in particular. It's like, I think there are too many iterations to a possible lineup to get so worked up about what that CLV could look like in week 17, like, even though, like, I think anyone sitting here right now probably wishes they had 25% Neighbors in the 4th round, right? Just given like what ended up happening, I'm sure you'd feel a lot better. Maybe not 25%, but at least like 20% Neighbors at that 4th round price tag. But even if you're drafting them in round 2, I don't think it's a given because there's so many iterations as to what could go down in round 3, like the guys in round 3 and 4. One of the things that I talked about on the show last week, because like I was mostly fading Neighbors, crossing my fingers that his ADP would actually get lower if he was placed on PUP. And then that obviously didn't happen. And so I had to react quickly. Now, I think just given the way that like the landscape is and what I've experienced, at least, there is a window usually before things really get out, like things really get like before a player rises to where he should go, So like I had a week of just trying to get middle 3rd round into late 3rd round Neighbors. And then like, it turned into like 2-3 turn Neighbors and stuff. And I got to a point where like I'm properly weighted with Neighbors because I was able to react in that way. And the way that I kind of framed it, and I said this last week, maybe it's a little cope, but like round 3 and round 4 to me is really flat in general. And so like, I don't even feel like the opportunity cost was like so significant that like, oh, it's going to ruin my teams if I'm drafting Neighbors in round 3. It's going to be an interesting question, I think, if you get to like the 1-2 turn with Neighbors and you're like, now all of a sudden, these guys that are like legitimate league winning type running backs and stuff that you're drafting them over, or like even like the Drake London line, I think is a really interesting one with Neighbors, just because London has just as much upside standalone as Neighbors does, right? Without the injury concerns. So like, that's probably the question for me. But again, I don't know. I'm trying to not like care so much about CLV in the end, like not get so worked up about it, because if it's the dude like Kenyon Sadiq, I have a lot of Kenyon Sadiq and now he's cheaper. I'm still drafting cheaper Sadiq because I just think he's a good value in general. Yeah.
I think that's the right approach. Like you said, like if you try to do I don't know why you try to do this, but as a hypothetical exercise, like draft a team from the 112 and then on your next draft, try to draft the same exact team from the 112. You're going to, unless you're reaching on every player, right? Like you're not going to be able to do it. There's just like so much randomness in how the draft shake out. There's so much randomness, in the playoff structure of these tournaments where you can be paired against stronger or weaker teams in the playoff pools. Like there's just so much out there. Whereas like if this was we're talking here about sort of generally playoff best ball, like the structure of the best ball millionaire. If you're playing like a season long contest where it's like most total points throughout the whole season, that's where maybe the CLV thing like starts to matter more. But in these tournament pod structure tournaments, I think it's not my primary concern at all.
Yeah, it's a 1 week thing where like it doesn't, like Neighbors could have a bad week, or like that person that player that you would be taking Neighbors over, could Drake London, if you're taking him over Drake London, he could blow up in week 17, and then all of a sudden like you don't have the guy. But also, does that mean that you are not frequently like pulling guys up in ADP to get a differentiated lineup? So like if you're, like Nico Collins has been end of round 2, early round 3, now that Neighbors gets pushed up sometimes, so you'll see him fall at times. But like, are you ever pulling Nico to the other side of the board just to differentiate your lineup, or are you more of the mindset of what you just said, where it's like, yeah, these lineups are differentiated enough because we're drafting 20 rounds on DraftKings, and clearly there's going to be very, very many iterations of what we could possibly do with this lineup?
Yeah, I am not really someone who focuses a lot on like flipping the draft board by pulling a player up. I do think about like, I don't know, the one spot where I've like thought about it a little bit this year is like the 12 spot. So the 1-2 turn, I guess in the first round, where like, I don't want the same combination of 2 running backs every single time. Like I don't want all my teams to be Genty, Barkley or whatever. So I have been like randomizing that a little bit, but yeah, I don't, as opposed to pulling someone up in the first couple rounds, I generally have a rule where like, if a player in the first couple rounds just falls 4, 5, 6, 7 picks past ADP, unless it's a guy I like intentionally have a huge fade on. Yeah. I just like take that value every time. And I think that kind of achieves the same effect in a lot of ways without like reaching for a player. So that's kind of my approach to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's how I've approached things as well.
Every player in the league has a scouting report: strengths, weaknesses, history, tendencies, everything an opponent wants to know. But what if somebody built a scouting report on you? Data brokers collect your personal stats, your name, address, phone number, family details, and other private information. Then they package it up and legally sell it to anyone willing to pay, sometimes just for pennies. And then what? The person buying your information may not be looking to draft you. They may be looking to scam you, steal your identity, and start using your name like it belongs to them. That's where LifeLock comes in. LifeLock's automatic data broker removal tool helps you find exposed personal information and remove it from those data brokers. If you fall victim to identity theft, LifeLock's restoration specialist will block and tackle for you, which means they'll handle your case from start to finish and restore your identity guaranteed. Because only LifeLock truly protects your name and your identity. So go get LifeLock at LifeLock.com and use promo code FOOTBALL for up to 30% off your first year. That's LifeLock.com, code FOOTBALL. Again, LifeLock.com, code FOOTBALL.
ChatGPT can do more than answer questions. It can help you get real work done. ChatGPT Work is built for bigger projects with multiple steps. You bring the goal, along with the information it needs, like briefs, notes, files, feedback, calendars, data sets, or project plans. Then, ChatGPT can help turn all of that into something useful. An analysis, a tracker, a deck outline, a prototype, or a workflow you can keep shaping. It can also use approved apps, connected tools, files, and browser context to help move the work forward. And you stay in control. You give direction, review drafts, approve actions, redirect the work, and choose the final output. So you spend less time sorting through busy work and more time making progress on the work that matters. Put ChatGPT to work on your most ambitious ideas and projects. Get started at ChatGPT.com by selecting Work Mode. Available on Plus and Pro plans.
One of the questions that I love asking guests this year, because it just reveals a lot and it gets into like a lot of just how you're approaching the position and game theory and roster construction. Are you drafting Josh Allen? Is he overrated, underrated, or properly rated right now, do you think, on DraftKings?
Yeah, I like to be a contrarian in the fantasy best ball space sometimes. And I know everyone is saying Josh Allen is overrated, but in the case of the DraftKings ADP, I do actually agree with the, I guess, expert consensus. I do think he's a bit overdrafted at pick 28. It is a pretty massive gap between where he goes and where the next tier of elite quarterbacks go. Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, other guys that give you the dual threat ability, but are going 30 I think in Daniel's case, 40 plus picks later. So I do think with Allen, it's a bit too much to give up. If I was building, like, I do think it's an interesting debate though, because like year over year, Allen kind of does, if you do some kind of analysis of like points above replacement, relative to position, and then rank Allen versus other players, he does kind of like pay off this price tag most years. So from that standpoint, I can't say it's like a terrible pick. I think there's like a lot of like safety in what you get from Allen in best ball, where like year over year, he just crushes every year. But I do think I just like the 2x2s of like taking those slightly later elite quarterbacks, recognizing they have slightly lower odds than Allen of finishing QB1, but I think that gap from them to Allen doesn't really reflect like the difference in their odds there. So on DraftKings, I've been avoiding him with the caveat of what I said earlier. Like when guys fall 5, 6, 7 picks past ADP, I just take them. So I'm not taking 0 Allen.
Yeah, I'm with you. And then my other question is similar. I mean, it's a onesie position, but what about Brock Bowers, who I think a lot of people would view in a similar way as Allen, just being like by far the best at that onesie position? Are you being aggressive with Bowers this year?
Yeah, I'm in on Bowers at his DraftKings price tag, mid second round pick. I think last year you can largely chalk up a lot of his underperformance to injury. I feel like Kirk Cousins and Mendoza, while they're not anyone's like dream quarterback room, it adds like a base level of competency here to the offense, and the wide receivers remain like, I mean, we're talking about Malik Benson hype in training camp. That's what we're talking about from the wide receiver room here. It's really, really ugly. So I think the target share ceiling on Bowers justifies his price. I'm pretty in on him.
Yeah. Wide receiver this year, to me, I certainly have my stands, don't get me wrong, but I also look at like the top 30 at the position. And I think that's generally the right like 30 guys that should be drafted in that range. So I guess my question to you is like, do you have any fades in the top 30 at wide receiver? And this could be because like for me, a fade for me is just a guy that like, I'm still getting exposure to, like maybe a 3% to 4% exposure to. It's just not the guy that I'm getting the, 13, 14% exposure to.
For me, I agree with you. I don't have a ton. The guy I'm fading the most in the top 30 wide receivers would be Rashee Rice. And it's a tricky one with Rashee Rice, because I think if you do any kind of like projections to inform best ball, and I'm assuming that's for you, I don't know this to be the case, but I assume that Rashee Rice like projects pretty damn well. Whenever he's healthy, he puts up pretty big stats. He's pretty good from a peripheral stats perspective. It's not like the Chiefs added much to their wide receiver room this season. But I think for me in best ball, like a lot of what I'm trying to avoid is like negative tail outcomes in the first handful of rounds. And I think Rice just stands out to me like in a weird way. He kind of reminds me of like a dead zone running back in that you're kind of banking on projectable volume. Yeah. But you're kind of relying on like the Chiefs to run the offense a certain way. It's not like Rashee Rice is like other top 15, wide receivers by ADP. They're all like studs. If they hit the open market, they're getting massive contracts. Like their team has a ton invested in them. Rashee Rice, it is much more of like the PPR scam archetype where like, I'm not really sure he makes the Chiefs offense that much better. And like, if they decided to go away from using him at the focal point, I think he could lose a lot of value. So, and there's also like, I don't know, there's a bit of like an idiot tax thing with Rice that's like impossible to model, but you have to, I think, consider with how his offseason has gone. So he's the answer for me there.
That's a really good one to call out because, and I feel like I haven't even talked about him on many shows this offseason in general, because I'm not really like keen on like being high on Rashee Rice this year. It just doesn't seem like, because I agree with you where like, I don't think he's that special of a talent. I think that by default, he's been getting a lot of work in the way that offense has flowed, but there's a chance this year that like this offense just looks a lot different, with the Kenneth Walker signing, with Mahomes coming off the ACL, and obviously Cyrus Allen, the god, coming out of day 3 of the draft. No, in all seriousness though, like I think that's a good call out to make, because you're quite literally having to take him right now over a Nico Collins oftentimes, or like now Neighbors is there, even like a Pickens or a Devontae Smith. Like you can make the argument that I would make the argument certainly that they're better real life players. It's just that they're not
for sure
in this like environment where they just get fed out of the slot. And what if that just looks a little bit different? It is scary. It's at least fragile.
And to maybe emphasize that point, like how many in the history of fantasy football, how many 26-year-old wide receivers, being drafted in the top 2 rounds of fantasy drafts have reporting that their team isn't like interested in extending them long term. Like that, like that's the type of fragility. Like it's obviously that doesn't mean everything. Don't base your draft pick on that, but it's a weird data point with Rice and kind of undermines his stability. That you mostly like. That's why fantasy wide receivers are generally attractive in best ball. Is like to some degree they're like pretty stable. Like can hit the fan, but their talent will shine through. And Rice is just like a little bit different from that standpoint.
Yeah. No, it's a really good call out. Another question I wanted to ask. I feel like I've been drafting this year and not really thinking about teams that I am just so in on from the perspective of like just loving that offense and thinking that they're going to beat the market. It's more so like being reactive to what the room is giving me and then stacking based on that, right? If I get a falling value of Zay Flowers or something, and then I get Lamar in the 5th, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden I have a Baltimore stack or what have you. Now, obviously that leads to then being overweight or underweight on certain offenses that I'm stacking. But I guess my question to you is like, as you're drafting, are you kind of going about it the same way, or are there teams out there that you think are just like undervalued in general, or a team that might be lower key that might surprise people?
To like the macro point, I like am kind of with you where I let the skill position, tail wag the quarterback dog in best ball, where like I usually am not like entering a draft being like, oh, I want this to be a Baker Mayfield team, so therefore I'm going to draft Ibuka and then go from there. I'm not. I don't think I'm going out of my way. That said, like I think I have an answer to the question of what team I'm a little bit higher on, which would be the Packers. I'm pretty in on, throw the Jacobs thing aside, I think particularly their pass catchers and Love right now. I just really like how in years past, they always had this massive rotation. Even like people talk about Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Dobbs. Malik Heath ran 30% of routes last year. Like you got to get the Malik Heath role in there for some reason. And those guys are, Dobbs is gone, Wicks is gone, Heath is gone. It really should just be Watson, Reed, and Golden really consolidating the routes. No Packers wide receiver last year had more than a 77% route participation. That put Romeo Dobbs at 53rd in the league in route participation rate. So anyways, I think that could just really consolidate to the top guys. I think their O-line ranked by Brandon Thorne as 29th in the league this year. That's a bit concerning, but I think could push them to the pass even more if they're sort of unable to establish the ground game with Jacobs as they have done the past couple of years. And, we'll see with Love. Like he's always been one of those guys that's like very high in EPA per play. Like, can he scale that efficiency to a larger sample size from a passing standpoint? I think we'll find out this year, but I just like how concentrated it could be. And I think that concentration is not fully reflected in these wide receivers' prices just because of how it's been in prior years. Yeah, I love that call. LaFleur's offenses in Green Bay have never ranked in the bottom half of the league in touchdowns per game either. I mean, it's a very safe bet that offense is just going to be good. And like you said, if they don't rotate their wide receivers in such an infuriating way as they've done in the past, then all of a sudden you can see all of them pay off. I mean, and obviously like in the individual draft that you're drafting in, it's like, you make a bet on, you draft Jaden Reed, you make a bet on Jaden Reed. Maybe that means that you're not getting maybe you still get Matthew Golden, whatever the case may be. But like there are certainly outs where like Matthew Golden just doesn't progress and Jaden Reed takes on more of an outside role. So you can see how he would outplay ADP. Christian Watson was out of his mind when he came back last year. You could see how he would outplay ADP. And then Golden just goes kind of late. And so, what if he does take that step forward? So I like that call quite a bit. All right.
Before I let you go, I need a bold take, a bold prediction for this 2026 fantasy season.
Yeah, so I was trying to cook up something, better than just, wide receiver X will outperform ADP by one round this year. So sure. I'll give this a run. I'll say Colson Loveland becomes the first tight end to eclipse 20 PPR points per game since Travis Kelce back in 2020.
Yeah, that's bold. So
yeah. I think why it's definitely bold. If I can find that line in DraftKings, I'm not doing it. But why it's not crazy, let me give you a bit of the case for that. In games where he ran 70% of the routes last year, so using that, realizing it's an arbitrary cutoff, but saying, hey, games he was kind of a full-time starter, he averaged 18.5 PPR points per game. So he was right up on that 20-point threshold in that small sample last year. And he hit over 21 points in 4 out of 6 of those weeks. I think just like zooming way out, like obviously I wouldn't take him over McBride. I wouldn't take him over Bowers. Those guys should go ahead. But if you think about like the true ceiling cases for those 3 guys, one of them is on the Las Vegas Raiders. One of them is on the Arizona Cardinals. If you're making a case for one of these 3 offenses being top 5 in the NFL in scoring, it almost has to be the Bears over the Cardinals and Raiders. Like it's not even close. Again, talking about concentration of offenses like we did with the Packers, I think this thing will be really mega concentrated on Odunze, Loveland, and Burden in some order. Mm-hmm. Like their wide receiver 3 is going to be Xavier Thomas or Khalif Raymond. Right. There'll be a ton of snaps with Sam Roush and Cole Kmet on the field. I think you could see really high target rates for those top 3 guys. Yep. And I just feel best about Loveland emerging out of the 3. So think he has a real ceiling this year in fantasy.
I like it. I've seen a lot of the takes too of just like, oh man, these guys are going so high in drafts. Like one of them isn't going to pay off at cost. And I'm kind of like, I mean, I think it's possible that all 3 can still be like, okay, realistically, because if it is hyper targeted, like we think it can be, not unlike what we've seen with like Detroit with Ben Johnson, right? Where it was hyper targeted to those 3 guys, same positions, etc., where you don't even have a running back that you're as worried about as you would be with the backfield in Detroit. Like it depends on what you're saying would be like, like, are they all going to be league winners? No, that would probably be impossible, but could they all pay off in their own way in best ball? I still think that it could still be the case because of how hyper targeted those guys will be. I think the most likely outcome is like 2 of them will be, or, will be like the guys, like, don't get me wrong, but I still think that there's like still a case that all 3 can be okay and not totally tank your teams, if you are getting exposure to all 3.
Yeah, 100%. And also it's like, I get it's a bit of a projection that Caleb Williams is going to take another leap in year 3. Yeah. He wasn't amazing last year, even though it was a huge improvement from year 1 to year 2. But I really do think like to some degree in the NFL these days, it's like it's haves versus have-nots in terms of offensive coaching. Mm-hmm. And like Ben Johnson is just so firmly in the camp of coaches I'm willing to bet on. So if you are going to make a projection on a year 3 leap for a quarterback, which you do need the leap for the quarterback, I think, for this to happen with Loveland and Odunze and Burden, like I do feel okay about that bet because it's Ben Johnson and it's a quarterback who was, considered one of the best 5 quarterback prospects of the last 15 years, something like that. Right. So it's a bet I'm willing to make. Yeah, totally with you. All right, man, this was great. Really appreciate the time. Let everyone know where they can find you and what you're working on and such. Yeah, you can find me every week. I'm doing two shows, one on Pete Overzet's Best Ball Breakfast stream, and then on Legendary Upside, doing a weekly show with Pat Garain called That's Fair. And then, you can also follow me on X at Sherman_FFB. About like 10% of my tweets, you should take seriously as a fair warning. So I'll caveat with that. You can find my more straightforward analysis on those prior 2 streams. Great follow though. We were talking before we started, after you had the big win last year, and just the sarcasm that came through in so many of the tweets. It was brilliant, brilliantly done. Great follow on Twitter. Appreciate the time, man. And like I said, check out lateround.com, late round draft guide. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and the podcast. Otherwise, everyone,
Thanks for tuning in.
Scams don't always look like scams anymore. AI can make a fake ticket offer look legit or a sportsbook text sound official. And once an identity thief gets your personal information, they can start using your name like it belongs to them. And then what? LifeLock helps detect potential identity threats and suspicious activity. And if identity theft happens, LifeLock's restoration specialists can help restore your identity, guaranteed, because only LifeLock truly protects your name and identity. Get LifeLock at LifeLock.com and use promo code FOOTBALL for up to 30% off your first year. That's LifeLock.com, code FOOTBALL.
Some people use ChatGPT to answer questions. Others use it to get real work done. With ChatGPT Work, you bring the goal, plus real inputs like briefs, notes, files, feedback, data, and project plans. It can help turn them into an analysis, tracker, deck outline, prototype, or workflow you can review and keep shaping. You stay in control, giving direction and choosing the final output. Put ChatGPT to work on your most ambitious ideas and projects. Get started at ChatGPT.com by selecting Work Mode. Available on Plus and Pro plans.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.